Dominique, thank you very much, all of you, for your participation, particularly this late afternoon. I hope I don't put you to sleep. I'm going to try to give you a personal perspective on this very important subject of user-generated content, particularly in the context of blind people. My perspective, probably as scary as skiing at over 100 kilometers an hour, is navigating my way safely yesterday from the Notre Dame Cathedral back to my apartment near the Opera House by myself without asking any questions. And what's exciting about user-generated content is that this is one of the tools that helped me do it. And I'll relate to that in some of my discussion coming up here in the next 15 minutes. The devices I use, I've got one phone in this pocket, another phone in this pocket. I have my Braille note with GPS, and for backup, I even have a tie with a map of Paris on it. So what is user-generated content in this context? Crowdsourcing. Well, there's a bit of an irony in this because blind people are not a crowd. I mean, when you consider where you cut off the numbers, whether it's high visually impaired, low visually impaired, totally blind, we're still 1 or 2% of the population in developing countries. So it's hard to create a crowd when you have such a small group. That crowd gets bigger when you add other disabilities, so that's a good thing. But the exchange of information is something that's very important in terms of what we say, why do we want to reinvent the wheel? If one person figures something out here and another person over there can use the same information, how are we going to share that? There's a wonderful website I like that's bringing this to developing countries called The Inclusive Planet. So if you get a chance to check out The Inclusive Planet, I think it's a very wonderful concept. The intelligence in all of this sharing and this information comes in combining skills, understanding, and knowledge. Certainly something like Wiki is a good example of how that got started, and users could create content and edit content. There's usually no expectation of payment involved in this, although there's some slight variations on that when you consider something like the Mechanical Turk from Amazon, where people get an actual 1 cent per image that they identify, for example. The real beauty in user-generated content is in its assumption that people are individuals. So we have this content, this idea of universal design that we've heard about for many, many years, and that's a great concept. But when you try to think about how do you provide accessibility universally to people who are deaf, in chairs, in blind, intellectual disabilities, and that's so daunting that it almost makes you stop being able to move ahead. Now, there are some subjects where it's more possible than others, but I think it's important that we maybe forget about universal design for a second and think about the beauty of user-generated content, because each one of us is an individual. And I think it was Andy earlier was talking about this concept. If we don't worry about the labels of being blind, the way I'm blind is different than other people in here who are blind. I mean, they're all working with different tools and different techniques. So even within a specific group, we can't say there's anything universal. So we can customize the content to a disability, to one's interests, and even to one's location. There's a lot of different ways to filter the information. There's key motivations for creating the content. One motivation is just the value of it to yourself. I mean, in and of itself, the value of creating the content is great. A lot of the different organizations providing this are using games. Foursquare, for example, will make you, if you're the person that goes to the Starbucks the most often, you're the mayor of Starbucks. If that gets you excited, great. Whatever it takes to get you to participate is wonderful. They call it game, fame, and fun. Those are three of the things that are often used in this kind of approach to motivating people. What can you do with user-generated content? You can develop and customize apps to user needs. That's really what it's all about. As individuals, sighted people, whoever you are, you're a music lover, you're a foodie, these are all things that now are becoming really exciting because they are in the mainstream. Rating products and services with apps like Yelp for restaurants, lots of apps for hotels, different transportation services. And I'm really thinking back to when at Sendero Group, we started using what we called user points of interest, creating them many, many years ago. We first formed the product in 2000. At that point, there weren't maps. So you had to create a point at an intersection if you wanted to know about it and reference it later. And it was quite cumbersome to do this, and there's a lot of intersections in the world, so you don't create a whole lot of content outside of the place where you normally travel. But we did put that into our first GPS products, and the fun thing about that is we now have what I call individual footprints or geo footprints around the world. One of my more interesting ones recently was when we went to Costa Rica last June, and we're traveling up the Pachira River. And there's nothing out there. There's no maps. There's nothing. But sure enough, I've got my GPS turned on because I'm ready to record a user point when I find the first pub. You're getting a little thirsty out there on the river for a long while. All of a sudden, a user POI pops up on my Braille note, and it says, alligator sighting. That was kind of nice because my kids wanted to know, when are we going to see an alligator? When are we going to see a sloth? Somebody else had marked it, and sure enough, an alligator popped up pretty shortly after that. So people were looking for it. We did find, so I think my friend had the same thing in mind as I did, we did find a dock about 5 kilometers further on that did have gasoline and beer. 2 things to fuel us for the rest of our trip. How do we share this information? We have to distribute it. We have to collaborate on it. We have the internet, of course, for distributing this content. We have a lot of different apps that people are creating now that in different ways are related to user-generated content. Apps for identifying images for blind people like TapTapSee and VizWiz. The Danish video sharing organization called Be My Eyes. Years ago, Joachim Frank in Germany started something called See For Me. That was back in the 90s using a PC. So the user part of this is if we can share those images so that somebody doesn't have to tell me, so 5 different blind guys don't have to get on and ask the same question of the same image. Once the image is identified and tagged in the cloud, then other people can take advantage of it. The application of UGC for people with disabilities, this is really what's key. You want to enhance and share the information tailored to your interests and your disability needs, such as environmental cues. There's something in GPS I call the frustration of the final 50 feet. And sometimes I add another F word, depending on how frustrated I am. And that's because when I get close to something in GPS, the accuracy is roughly 10, 20, 30 meters, depending on where you are, if you're in tall buildings or whatever. So as a blind person, I really need some environmental clues to tell me what's nearby. So if that point, if the Science Museum here has some identifying factors so I can find the front and find the door, I might get within 30 meters, but where's the door? And I can do that by putting information into that user point. There's a bumpy sidewalk. There's a tactile strip, as you have out here. I could be looking for that. In other places, there can be things like a fountain. That's an accessible clue for a blind person. Wind chimes. There might be other things, bushes, different things that I can feel will really help me take advantage of that user-generated content. Excuse me. Examples of applications. that are specifically addressing the disabled. You'll hear from Damien shortly about his. Others include Able Road, Blind Square, based out of Finland. It's very popular among a lot of blind people. And of course, the Sendero group and the apps that we create. There's others that are for things outside of locating and GPS. Benetech with the Bookshare project. This is a way of users generating books and then making those available to other people who then we don't each have to scan in a book ourselves. Somebody scans it in once and then they share it with other people. And a lot of neat progress has been made with that around the world. The Smith Kettlewell Institute has been doing this with video content. Particularly in the US, we have very little described video. So they've come up with a way to have described video with different tools that you can read about on their website, which I'll show you at the end. Mainstream ratings are really essential for a blind person. So as a sighted person, when you're walking around Paris and you see a restaurant, you make an evaluation based on what you see. I can't see that. I have no idea if it looks good, if it's full of people, is it a good restaurant or not? So if somebody has rated that restaurant and it says 4.7 stars, and I get that in an accessible app, which I have, that's huge. It's more important to me than it is to you. Same thing for a hotel. What does it look like? What are some of the amenities? A lot of people add tips. So not only do I hear a 4.7 star rating, but there's other tips about some of the highlights. I came over here today in an Uber taxi. Now, Uber just started in Paris about a month ago, I believe. And that's a taxi that I can order from an app, and it comes right to me. I know the name of the driver, what kind of car he's coming in, his license plate, so I can make sure that I get him. And their prices are really good. I don't have to worry about trying to find a taxi on the street or get somebody to help me. And that's particularly difficult if you don't speak French in Paris. So having these apps is a way of helping out that difficulty. There's an overload of information. So a lot of times you want to hear everything on a menu. Other times you want to just hear the highlights. Depends on the situation. How much of a hurry are you in? And you don't want to leave it up to a sighted person to decide for you. Don't you love it when a waiter says, what would you like? And you say, what do you got? And they say, what do you want? What do you like? Who knows? You can't. You need some sort of overview at least before you can get past square one. I'm not sure if I'm on the right slide here or not, but I wanted to mention public transit and schedules. That's one thing that's really important. Things like Next Bus. And these can have annotations that tell you things like, I'm looking for a bus stop. Is there a bench? Is it a shelter? Is it a pole? How far is it from the corner? And some transit systems have really good specific data. There's one in Portland, Oregon, where they have 40 disability features added to their each one of their transit stops. Spatial information is being created through user-generated content. Anybody who's ever been to a casino knows how they don't have anything that's a straight line. But there are paths, and those paths are determined by traffic. And you can actually analyze through artificial intelligence how to get to the bathroom based on the traffic of people and where they're moving. And if you're analyzing that through things like Google uses for traffic, you can now use an indoor navigation what Google's using for traffic analysis in an outdoor situation. I better speed along here. So some of the factors for user-generated content success, we really need to create some standards so that Damien's organization and mine and a few of the others that are working on this aren't inventing our own systems. We really need to collaborate in order to make this work internationally. And I think we're at a transition point where that's going to be something that we need to do. The Sendero tag list is good, it's well thought out, but there aren't others that would be equally good if we just merge them. You have to create momentum. This is really key in user-generated content, this small crowd idea. If you don't have a big enough crowd, then it really doesn't have any value, and you see that in all of the social websites. Foursquare is one of the ones I like the best as a mainstream application that I've tried to contact and see if they will work with us. So we put our disability tags into the context of a mainstream application. And there certainly are lots of others, Expedia and Yahoo and whomever wants to play with us. I think it would do us well to team up in order to make that really useful. To the last slide, do we have contact information on there? Yeah, okay, good. One last thing that I want to pitch, and that's what I call people finding. You could automatically be generating information about who you are if you chose. And there are applications that will do that. We just have to choose to play along. So I would love to know who's in this room. And when we go out to coffee, I'd love to know who's there. If you chose at a conference to share your position through your mobile phone, we could each know who's around us, and a blind person wouldn't have to depend on an inaccessible badge. So that's one of the new frontiers that I'm really excited about, and I hope at a future conference we can be talking about people finding and how valuable that is in both social and professional situations for people who cannot see the badges. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to Damien's presentation.